Well, it's not as if our biological Darwinism has cracked the problem of life. Like it's a theory that isn't complete, and the details of it are still being worked out, and that's very damaging often. So, for example, you have, this is just one example, you have claims of people like Dawkins that reproduction can be reduced to sex, and that sex can be reduced to the proclivity of genetic material to replicate itself. And that has all sorts of metaphysical implications. And those metaphysical implications are very damaging. They promote a certain kind of hopeless nihilism.
In the sense of it's all just random creation, destruction, no point of purpose, no teleological output.
Partly that, and partly the notion that even within that, we're pawns of these massive forces that are reducible, let's say, to something approximating the desire of genes, the desire, I know that's improper terminology, to replicate themselves. Although, if pushed, Dawkins would say that the genes have no desire, but that's not the point, because his book, The Selfish Gene, what would you say? The sense that desire is there is implicit in the text. And so that has very troublesome metaphysical implications, because people can't live in the absence of some relationship with transcendent meaning. And they need that meaning to help them bear the suffering of their life without becoming demoralized, without becoming corrupt. This isn't optional. No, and I think one of the things the new atheists did very badly wrong was fail to take the problem that they were addressing with due seriousness. So either as an existential problem, although Sam Harris wrestles with that to some degree, because Harris definitely believes in the existence of something approximating transcendent evil, right, which is a religious stance, all things considered. But the problem of meaning can't just be dispensed with by reference to something like our deterministic relationship to a set of selfish genes.
So basically, are you saying that in the God is dead moment and in the rise of the new atheists and them sort of thinking that the battle had been won, that they neglected to replace it with a sufficiently robust and inspiring alternate story, because random selection of selfish genes is inadequate to guide culture and the human experience?
It's also not random. There's sexual selection. Darwin concentrated on sexual selection to a large degree, although for about 100 years after Darwin, the evolutionary biologists tended to avoid the topic of sexual selection because it didn't fit so nicely in with the notion of random evolution. There's nothing bloody random about sexual selection. Butterflies can detect departures from symmetry on the part of their partners at 1 part in a million. Like, their selection for beauty is by no means accidental. And it's certainly the case that conscious choice has selected human morphology down to its finest details. That's not random at all. Now, the mutation process is random, and I know Dawkins knows perfectly well.
So you're suggesting there's a bias towards selection of goodness, truth, and beauty, for instance? Something along those lines?
I would actually say that there's likely a selection towards something approximating the embodiment of that higher order unity that we've been speaking of. So I can give you an example of that.
It's like that William Blake quote, "Tiger, tiger, burning bright, thy fearful symmetry," right? Fearful symmetry, right, is noticeable. The patterns, the harmonics, Pythagorean.
Yeah, well, you can think about that in relationship to something like the hero myth. I mean, it's certainly no stretch of the imagination to presume that men who embody the heroism that's part and parcel of the hero narrative are much more attractive to women. Obviously. I mean, that's the basis of every romantic adventure story that's ever been written. And so there is something like selection bias in the direction of the same patterns that are portrayed in our most fundamental narratives. And none of that's accidental. And I would say that does imply something like a relationship between sexual selection and embodiment of the virtues that are part of our deepest stories, because part of the pattern of the hero is the portrayal, the embodiment of existential courage in the face of life's catastrophes.
Okay, so this is a beautiful point here, because to me this distills your exact role in the information and influence space. Because we've talked about two things so far, right? One was the erosion of the monad, a unifying truth, right? And then you've also just talked about kind of, in some respects, not biological determinism, but sort of the way things are, right? The Chad, high testosterone, heroic male being true and just, right? The natural outcome. It would be natural that women swoon. It would be natural that he leads his people, those kind of things. So you are holding, in my understanding of your work, a deep Western Judeo-Christian and sort of Enlightenment value space. Would that feel accurate to you? Because, and you're saying, hey, so there are important things here, but how do you, for instance, speak these and not end up as a battering ram in the culture wars, right? Not a useful idiot, a useful genius, right? To Christian ethno-nationalism, seven kingdoms, right? Like jihadi for Jesus peeps.
Yeah.
Or biological determinism and grist for the mill of the incels. Right?
Yeah.
Because, so you're speaking language that comes from a much deeper place, but in our current moment of hot takes, right, and retweets and rage bait, what you're saying has the capacity to get weaponized into some very ugly things that I don't think are from the heart of what you're saying. Well, that happens with hero mythology all the time, right? Partly because it can get fractionated. I suppose part of the attraction of the ethno-national Christian movement that's developing, let's say, on the right, which in some ways is another form of Pharisaism, because it's the attempt by the bad actors on the prejudiced side of the equation to harness the power of Christianity for their own self-aggrandizement. But there's an attraction in that too that's deeper than that, because... And just base tribalism, us versus them. Right?
Well, that and the fact, yes, definitely, but that also in the fact that compared to a dependent and neurotic male, an aggressive and warrior-like male is attractive. And so insofar as our culture has done everything it could to demoralize young men, in part because of, what would you say, an implicit critique of the oppressive patriarchy, all it does is increase the attractiveness of aggression to the young men who are demoralized. And the Christian nationalist types are capitalizing on that. It's not surprising. I'm not trying to justify it because it's a fragmented story. I mean, the hero, the archetypal hero, has a warrior element, but that warrior element is conjoined with an extreme proclivity for self-sacrifice, and generous social conduct, and reciprocal altruism.
Yes.
So, and that's an unbelievably important part of the story. Now, you even see this, by the way, in female pornographic fantasies, because we know the landscape of female pornographic fantasy, which tends to be literary, is the object of desire is a man with a well-developed capacity for mayhem. So that, well, the standard characters, the Google engineers mapped this when they were looking at pornography use online in a very good book called A Billion Wicked Thoughts. The canonical hero of female pornography is vampire, werewolf, pirate, billionaire, surgeon.
Yeah, mad, bad, and dangerous to know.
Right. But what happens in the narrative is that monster, that beast, is enticed into a reciprocal relationship that's permanent. So there's the wildness and the monstrosity part of the masculine psyche that's being portrayed in the fantasies, but then that's something that's, you could say in a way, domesticated, although that's not a perfect term for it, but brought into productive relationship with a woman in the pornographic fantasy, but then the broader community. So there's a balance, there's a very tight balance, and it's one that women are trying to strike all the time in relationship to men, is they want men who are capable and even capable of being dangerous, but they want that encapsulated within.
It's the soothing of the savage beast, right? That there's the need to harness that kind of, unrestrained or unconstrained vitalism.
Yeah, to harness